please settle down. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Once again, may we request everyone to please settle down. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you. May we request everyone to please settle down. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Once again, may we request everyone to please settle down. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to one of the highlights of PTTC's anniversary year, the forum aptly held in these times of challenges, bouncing back, business recovery, and continuity in crisis. Let us all rise for the invocation and national anthem.
Heavenly Father, as we gather here in the harbor of your safety, we thank you for the gift of life and for the blessings you have given us. Father, you are the source of our comfort and strength. Protect us from the unpredictable elements of nature and calm all the storms of life that threaten us. Help us to be resilient in these trying times so that we may bounce back in times of sudden disaster, crisis, or chaos. Today, we are giving you our hearts, our minds, and our lives. Come speak your words of life into our beings, for you are our faithful friend, our wise counselor, and our perfect teacher. We implore for your blessing and divine guidance that the activities set for this event will be effective and successful. Strengthen all of us who come together to build a community united in harmony of love, life, and learning in the service of your holy name and our country. As we pray for productive and fruitful days ahead, may we always lift our progress up to you, who holds the honor and glory for who we are and what we do. This we ask in your mighty name. Amen.
You may now all be seated. Now, let us all please welcome our opening activity presider, Miss Judith Ilagan.
Good morning to all here present today. Please find your best seat and sit in comfort. You will need us today because today we will be having a long day for us to work and for us to work towards actionable plans to weather the crisis and as an input to plan better for whatever the future may bring. So now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Executive Director Nestor Palabiab for his welcome remarks.
So magandang umaga sa inyo lahat. Traversing through the traffic. Let's all be grateful. Walang disaster today. Although we're recovering from a lot. Okay, the opening of January has not been very auspicious in spite of the Year of the Rat. We had the eruption of the volcano, we have the NCOV, and now the headline, 8-hour water interruptions. So maybe it's because it's the gift of God to us, a very resilient race. Maybe we have the gift of faith and resilience because it has enabled us with our minds and our God-given talents and resources to prepare. Because already internationally, the Philippines has been cited as the most complete circumstances in terms of addressing these things. In fact, but the execution part is our challenge now. I would like first to accomplish the presence of here very important people who can make things happen. Our friends from the Department of Tourism, Yusik Jimenez, of course. Here, former Undersecretary Palabiab of the Department of Tourism. Mr. Red Constantino, Executive Director, Institute of Climate Change and Sustainability. Please stand up to recognize. Executive Director Constantino, you're here. Okay. Mr. Walter Panganiban, Lead Disaster Operations Center, Asian Institute of Management. Welcome, sir. Stand up to be recognized. Ms. Malu Habson, former Assistant Secretary of Department of Tourism. Miss Jill Bongal of the Labor Employment Officer of Dole is here. Okay, welcome. Director Merges and Densha, Director of the Regional Development Staff of NEDA. You're here, okay? Miss Marisa Argente, DTI Calabarzon. You're here? Of course, all welcome here. We are a community in this center, the PTTC-GMEA. We bank on the support of the government private sector to share throughout the country the expertise, the knowledge, and the need to be aware and to cooperate and collaborate. Let this be your territory as well, as we face so many challenges here. I don't need to plug what we have here, but we're putting up a lot of facilities here. A lot of things are changing to enable to welcome everybody, embrace here. Not because we promote disasters, but we want to be prepared for everything. Disasters and opportunities are twins, like Janus. One face looking at the other side, the other face looking at the other. Now, disasters are opportunities to be creative and to face challenges. This island was existed 600 million years ago. We are in the ring of fire. As the ring of fire, we are a product of disasters and cataclysm. There are no Philippine islands. That's why you don't find dinosaurs here. We're a product of the eruption of numerous volcanoes underground. By the way, we're number 2 in the most number of volcanoes in the world. Okay? In fact, if you believe in the Big Bang, the world was created by a disaster, but guided by intelligent design. And who's the designer? For those who believe God is God. If you believe in Hawkins, it's probability. But we are Filipinos. I believe most of us still believe in God. And with this faith and our concern for humanity, it guides us to put up this thing. Because what good is talking about business if we're talking about business as usual? Things are not as usual. Things are not as usual. So we must prepare our businesses people, particularly our friends from tourism industry, which is becoming one of the most important sectors of society, to prepare. It's a whining and crying. What do we need to do? And we need first to be aware of the magnitude of the issues that have to be addressed. Because awareness is the beginning of your motivation to succeed. Awareness is the beginning of your proactive plans. Awareness is the beginning of the actions that need to be done. This is our country. We cannot all migrate to Canada or other countries. So we must all plan out a service to God, service to country, to yourselves, and to the Filipino nations. I do wish you a very productive forum today. I think you go home now with equal reserve of being encouraged to address these issues and clear mind when you go back to your agencies and you go back to your businesses and our government friends here to be more inspired to address this issue, which can no longer be ignored. All right? So disaster is something we have to live with. We're all praying here. We don't face the big one. Although I'm proud to say, this is a building built by the Japanese. We have a floating structure under. So one of the safest places will be PTTC. And we're going to celebrate, incidentally, this year, our 33rd age of existence in DTI. We're the only institution in DTI has its own building. We're the only building that was visited by the Empress of Japan, no less. So this place is history. And we do believe in the future we'll still have a place to occupy in the hierarchy of the Philippine government. So magandang umaga po. Let's have a productive session today.
Thank you so much, Executive Director Nestor Palabiab. Of course, this forum would not have been possible without the enthusiastic support thrown in by our mother agency, the Department of Trade and Industry. So, when PTTC-GMEA proposed to undertake this activity, the Office of the Secretary and our Undersecretary wasted no time in approving this and even provided funds to make this happen. You're aware of the all-out efforts to bring the competitiveness of our MSMEs notch higher. Our Undersecretary Makatoman wanted to attend this event this morning so he can also take the opportunity to meet the players, but some matters urging immediate attention came up. So he just requested DED Nelly Deliera to read his statement, though he might come by anytime if his flight back to Manila will allow this. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming DED Nelly Deliera for the Undersecretary's opening message.
Thank you very much, Judith. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I wouldn't be mentioning one by one the VIPs because you were already properly acknowledged early on. And I understand going actually over the registration form that we had, we actually have a very good lineup of officials coming from the tourism industry. Thank you very much for joining us. I actually saw Mr. Poch Macaranas at the back. Hello, sir, of AIM. Join us here. And of course, from, I forgot. Okay, anyway, I'm just here to read to you the message of the DTI Trade Promotions Group Undersecretary, who is on his way to Manila now. He has attended the outbound mission in Dubai. Understandably, he's landing at about 10 o'clock today, so he wished also to join us. But anyway, in advance, here's the message. And it goes this way. It is my distinct honor and privilege to open the PTTC-GMEA's 33rd founding anniversary special to celebrate an important milestone in PTTC-GMEA's history. Numerology identifies 33 as a master number centered on altruism, a positive trait of selflessly caring and raising consciousness of as many people as possible. Exactly indeed at 33, through its training programs, PTTC has continuously performed its altruistic role in uplifting lives of MSMEs in their path to global recognition. We in the DTI Trade Promotions Group proudly acknowledge the center's accomplishments, such as mentorship to food processing companies to attain halal, FDA and international standard certifications, lifestyle producers to create and promote innovative global brands, and the most rapidly growing services sector to be responsive with the currently disruptive business environment. For the year 2020, PTTC is focusing on enabling future-ready and highly skilled entrepreneurs adapted from the Singapore Skills Framework model. This is aimed for Philippine MSMEs to remain relevant amidst the evolving challenges of Industry 4.0. Guiding them to become relevant is help them strengthen their learning agility to learn something new, to unlearn the obsolete, and to relearn something valuable for mastery and adaptation. However, we never expected January 2020 to shock us with an emergence of natural and health disasters, causing various industries to suffer. Most vulnerable is tourism, with countless travel bans, social distancing that adversely affect big businesses in the industry chain, comprising of hotel, accommodation, travel and tours, MICE, transport, and those that supply services and products, including souvenir items. For the crises that are hurting both tourism and trade, PTTC, through DTI TPG support, has sought support from government and private sector stakeholders to gather ideas and craft action plans that will help businesses recover and continue in time of disasters. Seeing this large participation of leaders and representatives from the private sectors, the NGOs, government, and other sectoral groups, I couldn't be more impressed and grateful for all your time, energy, and resources as we unite in our common desire to make Filipinos especially MSMEs, safer and more resilient to the threats of natural calamities, climate change impacts, and health challenges. Today, we are empowering positive community resilience to bounce back and build back better, because resilience without planning and taking action won't make businesses, especially MSMEs, prosper. Today, we are strengthening the spirit of community, the spirit of bayanihan. At the end of this power-packed forum, we want you to walk out of this door able to follow through a business continuity plan and set the standard to other enterprises as we forge our own pathways. I'm proud to say that the Trade Promotions Group stands with PTTC-GMEA, Management Association of the Philippines, ASEAN Society Philippines, Asian Institute of Management, and Gray Matters Incorporated, who are poised to make a difference in creating a more sustainable future for all MSMEs and building the preparedness of industries where the threats of natural calamities, climate change impacts. The health challenges are most keenly felt. Thank you, and I hope today's forum will deepen our discussion and understanding toward a more comprehensive and effective business crisis management for Filipino MSMEs. This is going to be an exciting forum of mapping out opportunities, weathering the storms, and creating business solutions. We encourage you to discover new insights, participate in the discussions, and share ideas that will enliven the forum and conclude with a concrete action plan for businesses to continue and grow. After all, we need to be altruistic in these trying times. Again, ladies and gentlemen, the message of Undersecretary Abdul Gani Makatoman of the DTI Trade Promotions Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary Abdul Gani Makatoman, for the support and encouragement. So that completes our opening activities. I know you're all raring to get this forum on the road. So now may we have, once again, Deputy Executive Director Nelly Deliera, now speaking on her behalf to provide us an overview of the proceedings. We now turn this over to DED Nelly Deliera as the PTTC-GMEA lead for this forum.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Now this is me. But I will also read the materials because I wanted to, cover everything that we wanted to cover. Okay, and initially, of course, we'd like to thank the support of our ED, Nestor Palabiab, to mount this event. I would like to particularly, before finally reading the content of, what will happen today, I'd like to particularly thank also my former boss at the Department of Tourism, Yusek Alma, and of course, close in, day and night, we're also, discussing and talking this out with ASEC MJ. Thank you. It's actually the tourism sector that we're focusing on, basically because it's one of, if not the most affected sector when we talk about the current crisis that's happening in the Philippines and in the world right now. Okay, anyway, thank you, Judith, once again. This forum will kick off our business continuity series to assist enterprises in the recovery process in the wake of crisis events that are happening or coming one after the other. We are very well aware of the African swine fever, typhoons Tisoy and Ursula, Taal volcano eruption, drought in many areas, and now the COVID-2019 pandemic threat. The effect of this crisis are truly enough to make enterprises buckle down under pressure. One industry cannot say that it's a localized problem because the effects goes up and down in its own value chain. Recognizing this threat to the viability of MSMEs, we thought it is timely to call this forum in at least 5 major industries that are most affected and see how we can help in the interim and possibly long-term for their business continuity and recovery. This is just the first. As I've mentioned, this is going to be a series of activities that we're doing for business continuity and business resiliency. There has already been invitation after seeing the promotions that we're doing for this Palawan, Baguio, and even Davao has already signified their intention to run this in their respective areas. We thought we should begin with tourism, the third largest contributor to the country's GDP, and with the most number of value chain enterprises attached to it. Most importantly, it is a source of livelihood for many communities dependent on its market. The MSMEs are actually suppliers of the different tourism value chain. Particularly the DTI, particularly the regional offices would be supporting the MSMEs and DTI regional offices and also the DTI as a whole. Let me just clarify the perspective of why. Maybe some of you are asking why is it that DTI and the Philippine Trade Training Center is mounting this. The DTI has general responsibility over trade and industries. We are concerned with the survival and recovery of MSMEs that happen to have business that either directly relates to tourism or part of its value chain. We are sure that DOT will probably have its own marketing and promotions plan, and we will touch on that part of the overall plan. But it is more about the whole business operations and operation of enterprises, the purview of DTI. Why PTTC? Well, basically because PTTC is the training arm of the Department of Trade and Industry, and with more specific mandate for Global MSME Academy. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem is too big for one agency to handle. We in the government need to align across agencies and with our private sector partners and with our private sector partners and other stakeholders joining hands to ensure that we survive. Who knows, we can even find or expand other opportunities that can possibly open. If you are part of the value chain of other industries, you are likewise welcome to join future series as they get tackled. Maybe one of you would be interested to join us in our Baguio leg or Palawan leg or even Davao leg. I met the manager of Marco Polo Davao early on. Maybe they would also be interested to partner with us in mounting this particular event in Davao. Now let me just give a snapshot of the program flow. The forum is divided into 4 capsules. Pills we need to take in order to accomplish the overall objectives of coming up with actionable steps for our MSMEs from the whys and the hows. We are also adopting a changed format for the forum. This is going to be an interplay of presentations and panel discussions. That's why if you may have heard and seen right now, we have a lot of VIPs and very knowledgeable persons who can discuss and help all of us in understanding and providing insights on how we're going about this. Because we want to bring in as many insights as possible to widen our appreciation of the subject. But I am sure that that will be better explained by the program chair. Now, let me introduce. We requested to preside over the forum, who will be presiding over the forum. We said we will dispense with the introductions of all our VIPs, but let me just indulge with this one. With the idea of crisis management forum, when the idea of crisis management forum was initially discussed, we thought we should bring in someone who understands both the health and tourism industry to provide insights. We thought that the expertise should include business experience too, so that whatever ideas we come up with can be actionable too. Most importantly, we should bring in someone who will be unafraid to think outside the box and explore innovative ideas that this crisis need for businesses to recover. For us, and for me especially, there was only one person who fits that description. And I know because I worked with her in another life. That was at the Department of Tourism. And she knows the depth and breadth of her perspectives in a variety of issues. And most especially, she has the heart for it. For all of you who knows her, I know that you will agree with me more than 100%. When I approached her, she immediately said, yes. Sino bang maghihindi, di ba? Para sa bayan, sabi nga natin palagi. All the conceptualization, design, and execution details were prepared and executed by her with precision. The result is a well-designed forum. And may I also thank her because she is doing all this pro bono. Palakpakan naman natin. Actually po, lahat ng mga resource persons po natin ngayon dito and even panel discussants are pro bono. They're all doing this para sa bayan, di ba? Because if we do not come together as, as one, composed of different government agencies and as one Filipino, private, government, and all the stakeholders, I think it will be very challenging and it will really be very difficult for us to address and find ways how to address where we are in right now. This is actually out of love for the country, for the industries, and for the communities it serves. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like now to present our program chair, former Undersecretary of the Department of Tourism, the ASEAN Society Philippines President, co-chair for Ease of Doing Business Committee for Management Association of the Philippines, and the ESG point person for MAP Trade, Industry, and Tourism Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, former USEC Almarita Jimenez.
Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. At lalong magandang umaga sa mga kaibigan kong panelists din ngayon, whose arms I have to twist and then promise that I will reciprocate by speaking in their respective forum also, just so that they will show up and share their insights. And I'm talking about some I have to specially mention some friends like, of course, Poch Mangaranas over there, and Renato Constantino, whom I heard in one forum, and I wanted him to be here to share what he had to say in the World Bank Forum. Of course, Yusek Oka, usual suspects, sabi ko sa kanya, nandito tayong lahat to work for the industry. So thank you, Dean Nelly, and to the DTI PTTC Global MSME Training Academy. Do I have my presentation now, please? Who did a wonderful job of organizing and covering this forum in a very short time, just 2 weeks, to be exact, from planning to execution. That it is a matter of great urgency is best illustrated by this quick response, and that it is a matter of serious concern can be seen by the attendees that gathered this morning, who in all probability tossed their schedules aside to make room for this discussion. Kasi nakikita ko mga familiar faces dito tulad ni Arjun. I laugh every day sa kanyang Facebook posts. I wish that we could meet in happier circumstances, but it is what it is. And certainly we hope that the inputs we get this morning can be used as tools to manage the crisis better and to have a more proactive response in the future. Where do I point the clicker? Yan ba? Saan ko ba pinupoint to? Ayaw niyang gumalaw. The idea is not to spoon-feed the answers, but to come together as one industry, exchange ideas, and together decide what to do to bounce back and recover and continue to do business in the future. The idea is to learn from one another and act collectively, because to be paralyzed is certainly not a viable option, both from the perspective of the enterprises and for the country. In the past 12 months, we experienced crisis after crisis. And just when we thought we are being given a breathing space, the pandemic threat of the coronavirus or COVID-19 reared its crowned head. There's a difference between crises that are offshoots of natural disasters, such as earthquakes, floods, typhoons, and the like, and those that are health-related. The former, we are certain at least about the extent. They can be location-specific, and the duration can be estimated. Not so with health hazards. Health issues that can potentially become life-threatening sow fears in our hearts, and we are all quick to retreat from these dangers instinctively. The effect tends to be uncertain, especially for viral causes, because its spread can be far and wide and in very short time, given the ease of travel and mobility of people, the population density, and the toll in an already burdened public health system. The World Travel and Tourism Council provided a snapshot on the past economic impact of outbreaks on destinations. Ayaw niya talaga eh. Sabihin ko na lang, next, next. Ayaw ko sana eh. In 2003, the impact of SARS on China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Canada was estimated between 30 to 50 billion, with tourism to Singapore falling by 70%, while H1N1 worldwide was estimated to have lost between 45 to 55 billion, with the loss to the Mexican tourism industry valued at 5 billion following the outbreak in 2009. The impact of Zika was valued between 7 to 18 billion following the outbreak in 2016. Next. The more important issue is how long will it take to bounce back? In 2018, WTTC came out with a research on the impact of the Ebola epidemic on travel and tourism. And while this is a unique location-specific disease outbreak, the impact was immediate for Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, but this was also felt in wider Africa. Tourist arrivals went down by 50% for Sierra. But what we should note is that up to the time of this study, which was published in 2018, both arrivals and spending from international visitors have not yet returned to their pre-epidemic break, with inbound arrivals from Western markets hit the hardest. The resulting loss of direct travel and tourism GDP is equivalent to almost 1 to 1.6% for the directly affected countries. Growth rates slowed down by as much as 40%, and the economy in Guinea almost came to a halt for over a 2-year period. Let us think about that as we assess the potential setbacks to the local and global tourism industry. Next. What exacerbated the situations then and even now are the rumors, fake news, and panic that spread faster than the virus. Margaret Chan, the former Director General of the WHO, cited that World Bank estimate 90% of economic losses actually arise from uncoordinated and irrational efforts of the public to avoid infection. The economic and social fabric impact underscored the importance of coordination and cooperation. First, to make sure that people are not exposed to health risks, and second, that they are shielded from the economic impact. Next. I heard some people say that we survived the effects of SARS and MERS-CoV, but that might be easier said than done. For one, what makes the coronavirus a serious problem is the fact that even as we speak, nobody seems to have an explanation about the exact nature of the virus and how to contain the contagion. And certainly, the world has progressed by leaps and bounds since the SARS outbreak 17 years ago. The global economic impact of 2019 nCoV expected to be substantially more significant than that of SARS, primarily because China has gone from being a bit player in the global economy in the early 2000s to an economic powerhouse today. That means the hit will be bigger and wider. I have to point out too that these health crisis events happened in the past, and one would think that we should have been alerted and thus more prepared with our responses today. That does not seem to be the case, though. We need to accept that we did not build on the lessons to come up with business recovery and continuity plans that would have been immediately activated when similar events occur. I hope that we will be more proactive this time and make that an output of this forum. That is critical because next, whenever crisis event hit, the travel and tourism industry take the biggest blows, not just in health hazards, but in disasters, whether natural or man-made or political conflicts. And every time these happen, it gets harder and harder to bounce back. Next. Our enterprise ought to plan better because my fearless forecast is that we will be facing this with increasing frequency and magnitude. And I think by now, we all know that from experience. Next. Just take a look at few examples of COVID-19's projected impact on tourism. Thailand's China market dropped by 90% and overall expects at least 5 million drop in tourism arrivals. It's almost, 5 million is actually, their drop is almost the total of our arrivals in 1 year. And with the potential loss of about 1 to 8 billion in revenue. Across the region, other countries are reporting their tourism business down 30 to 50%. Indonesia's goal to attract 10 million tourists per year from China will not happen, and it's already poised to lose about 4 billion in tourism-related revenue. Myanmar officially marked the beginning of Myanmar-China bilateral cultural and tourism year last January, partly in response to sharp decline in tourists visiting from US and Europe. And I'm sure they are worrying now as borders are closing to China across the globe. Singapore is forecasting a fall in visitors of up to 30% this year, with a daily loss of up to 20,000 international arrivals. The Singapore Tourism Board's chief executive is preparing for a longer, slower recovery than SARS. Singapore recorded 27.1 billion in tourism spending last 2019, 3.2 billion of which came from its 3.6 million Chinese visitors. Global airline revenues are expected to fall by 4 to 5 billion in the first quarter of 2020 as a result of flight cancellations, and this is according to the report of the UN's International Civil Aviation Organization. Next. And when you consider the value chain, the losses are stacking up. In the first quarter report of global companies, COVID-19 was mentioned many, many times. Yum China, one of the largest fast food operators in the country, with brands like Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and KFC, spoke about the disease the most, mentioning it no less than 45 times in its first quarter earnings report. Luxury goods companies like Louis Vuitton, Estée Lauder, and Capri Holdings have also taken a hit because of weaker consumer demand. Cruise line operators such as Royal Caribbean, which have largely struggled as the virus takes a toll on the global industry, spoke about the impact on scheduled voyages. And of course, we are all familiar with the cruise liner now docked in Yokohama. Casino and hotel operators have also felt the impact from closures due to the virus, with Las Vegas Sands and Wynn Resorts saying they are losing up to 2.6 million US dollars per day. Next. And we are just talking about travel and tourism. Global estimates keep going up as effects across industries and their value chains are starting to be felt. The first session in this morning will tackle these situation reports because obviously one cannot. Huwag kayong mag-alala, sasabihin ko kay Nelly, bigyan kayong kopya. Pero kumuha na rin kayo, baka makalimutan niya. The first session will tackle the situation reports because obviously we cannot begin unless we know what the extent of the problem is. And our partner from Asian Institute of Management will be able to give us the global impact. while the presentations from NEDA and hopefully from DOT can give us the local impact. We are not confining our sights on just the present events. We know the crisis horizon is expanding, and we need to know what is in store for us as we amplify the concerns about climate change, environment, sustainability, and governance. And we have an expert to discuss that with us today. Session 2 will bring majority of the stakeholders together, both from the government and the private sector enterprises most affected. We hope to surface specific sector concerns and what help they can offer or solutions that should be considered to address them. Session 3 will be about learning from the lessons of the past, how similar events were handled, what could be done better, and what are the suggested responses to manage the crisis. And the last session, session 4, will use all the inputs from sessions 1 to 3 and present big ideas on how to tackle them. We know that we have favorite solutions, but I think it is time to explore other innovative and creative ideas. The name novel coronavirus is so apt. It requires novel thinking and action plans too. I urge everyone to stay until the end. Session 4 will be where we crystallize these approaches, and you will miss a lot if you will not be around to hear them and participate in the discussions. The advantage for those who will stay is that they can go home with germs of ideas, pardon the pun, and start working on them right away, as there will be interim and suggested long-term solutions for crisis and disaster management. Next. Naku, hindi pala ako nakapag-next. Next, sige. Ulitin mo. Next. Okay. Why is it that every time I present, I always have these technical glitches? I cannot understand. Maybe meron akong balat. Tourism has become a huge global business that accounts for 10.4% of global gross domestic product and 10% of global employment. Its year-on-year growth increases surpass those of the economy, with the UNWTO projecting a future growth of 3 to 4% in international tourist arrivals for 2020. Next. But that was before nCoV-19 hit China and very rapidly started spreading to the rest of the world, with 20 countries and counting. Back in 2003 with SARS, China, as a source country for tourists, was relatively minor, receiving fewer than 38 million tourists and sending about 17 million tourists abroad. In 2019, it is estimated that China received 142 million inbound tourists, and Chinese made 134 million trips abroad and 5.5 billion trips domestically. The severe travel restriction means that the economic impact of this virus will be felt in every corner of the world and almost every sector of the economy. They are our third largest source markets, and we expect the fallout to really hurt. I see here, text, two-pronged responsibility. Next. One, that we do not trivialize the problem because we want the industry to recover fast. As I mentioned, we are vectors and we can cause rapid spread because of travel. Our search for solutions should be with a high sense of moral responsibility, that of not endangering the lives of the people because we want to minimize our business losses. And next, second, that we find solutions by keeping the first in mind, but also cognizant of our communities. By that, I mean those that depend on our industry for their livelihood and employment, and their businesses as part of our tourism value chain. Let us be conscious of our role to take care of the members of our tourism family. And let our solutions be inclusive, workable, actionable, strategic, and most importantly, compassionate. Next. Crisis is a test of our composure, resilience, intelligence, strength, innovative spirit, and sustainability. Let us win in all those fronts. Next. Today we stand at crossroads. We have to explore solutions together across sectors and as one stakeholders. The problem is really too big for us to do this alone. At this time, let us resolve to set aside our differences and keep an open mind, willing to let new ideas come in. The stakes are too high, and it can spell the difference between survival and extinction of our businesses. I hope that we can rise to the challenge. And with that, I wish everyone a fulfilling day of exploration ahead. Okay, as program chair, I need to start the proceedings now. So, may I call on the first presenter, who will be from the National Economic Development Authority, representing Undersecretary Rosemaria Dillon. May we call on? Iba-voice over daw, wag na daw ako. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Almarita. We are now entering the forum proper. The forum will feature 4 capsules. The first is Ground Zero, the starting point. This provides participants with the overview of crisis occurrences and how they are affecting the global and local developments. Our first presenter from Asian Institute of Management, Executive Master in Disaster Risk and Crisis Management, Mr. Walter Panganiban, Lead, Disaster Operations Center. Let's give him a warm round of applause.
Good morning, everybody. Are you feeling okay? Is it okay if I step down? Perfect. The music that they used to usher in guests, quite very perky, just like the spiel of Executive Director Nestor and the updates that we've heard from Ma'am Nelly and then later on from Ma'am Alma. My task this morning was supposed to be an explanation of where we are in terms of crisis, pandemics, and disasters. Actually, just a disclaimer, I am not an expert, but I am a VIP, a very ignorant person, which makes my talking in front of you all the more difficult because Dr. Macaranas is in the room. We haven't formally met, but being one of the big names at the Asian Institute of Management, it's terrifying knowing the legend is listening to me talk. Okay, then another disclaimer, my entire talk is a ginormous sales pitch. Okay, so keep that in mind. I asked earlier the organizer to leverage on Slido. You're familiar with Slido, right? Okay, so I asked them to put up the poll. Which should come first? Business continuity, resilience, profitability, sustainability. You can still vote. So go on to Slido, check it out, and the code is laging handa. I need this later on to prove a point, and hopefully I'm right. So far, we're seeing 2 responses, business continuity and resilience tied, 50-50. But your choices are profitability, business continuity, sustainability, and resilience. Okay, so make sure you go to Slido, and later on we will check out what the polls numbers would be. Okay, so let me just do what I was first tasked to provide. a snapshot of where we are right now. First, just to clear the air, when you talk about crisis, what do you actually mean? You've heard it before. And in your business, if somebody goes to rob your office, takes away your petty cash, is that a crisis? Who thinks yes? Who doesn't care that I'm talking? Okay, ay, ito na lang. Dito tayo magsimula. Medyo stress pa kayo eh. Okay, erase. Sino gusto yumaman? Taas kamay. Taas kamay! Gusto yumaman. Yung mga hindi, bantayan nyo. Markahan nyo hindi nagtaas ng kamay. Ayaw nilang yumaman kasi mayaman na sila. But my question, kung ganun ka na kayaman, can your business recover from the potential eradication of the entire platform by which you do your business? So in the tourism sector, kung mayaman ka na at happy ka na at ayaw mo nang yumaman, what if hindi ka na pwedeng magbenta ng tours? Okay? That's one side of it. So going back to my question, when you ask what crises are, let me define it. A crisis is a situation or event that leads to a serious disruption of your operations to the point of big financial and reputational impact. Just a quick background, I spent 17 years doing public relations work for Coca-Cola and then for Me Johnson. And in the years that I've been with the corporate sector, I've been tasked to work on crisis management. Hence, crisis has always been used and misused as a term. So, for our first part, understanding that crisis is that situation that threatens major disruption of the businesses. What now is a disaster? Pag bumagyo ngayon, disaster na ba? Who thinks yes? Nope. Okay, who says no? Pag bumagyo ngayon, hindi pa siya disaster. Okay, good. Okay, may mga hindi pa sigurado. Let's ask a different question. Pag bumaha sa Buendia later, disaster na ba yun? No. Oh, depende. May naririnig akong depende. So, ano yung determining factor when you call it a disaster? I will preempt the slide. A disaster, okay, happens when the resources of the institution or the organization to address the emergency needs at that time is no longer sufficient to manage the situation. For example, was Taal a disaster? Who thinks no? Okay. Who says yes? Okay. We will not go into the metrics. But by definition, a disaster situation is when the resources of the government, an institution, an organization is no longer sufficient to manage the emergency needs. In the course of our observation, it appears that Taal, at a certain point, was bordering into disaster. And then, nagbago yung tono ng bulkan. So, hindi tayo umabot doon. Okay, ang haba ng segue ko. Can we start my presentation? Thank you, please. So, that's the snapshot that I would like to share. And FYI, doon sa sinabi ni Miss Alma sa kan executive director, parang we're looking at things just this January 2020, pagpasok ng taon, or in her presentation, binanggit niya yung Zika virus and talked about SARS also. But just for your information, in 1918, anybody alive during 1918? Okay, meron? Okay, in 1918, there was a Spanish flu that infected 500 million people, mostly in North America and Europe, and it killed 100 people. Where are we right now in terms of the COVID-19? I think the deaths are at the thousands, right? And the infected people about the tens of thousands. So imagine that versus the Spanish influenza in 1918 when there are no air travel yet. Compared it today where you can get piece of air and travel the world. So put those two things in context. The things that we are experiencing now are scary and problematic and a lot of times would cause fear and panic. But imagine during those days when such a very trying disease had no particular remedy. I am not a scientist, I am not a doctor, I will not go through the details of the particular virus. But in starting off this session, I would like to start with the three things that we would like to focus. First part of the presentation is about describing the world that we live in. The second is about resilience programming. And the third is about opportunities that we can get from disasters. Executive Director mentioned it earlier, and I hope you were paying attention. He mentioned that, where is Executive Director? He mentioned that disasters and opportunities are like Janus' two-faced God. On one hand, you have the disaster. On the other one, you have the opportunity. We'll talk about that later on. So, first slide, please. Go next, please. It's a VUCO world. Dr. Macaranas can expound more on this. But it's a military term they discovered in the past. I don't know when. But it describes where we are right now. And if you haven't really understood, the ramifications, let's run through them one by one. So it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. Next slide, please. This is Taal volcano, right? Yes, familiar. Growing up in the Philippines, you're familiar. If you are in the tourism business, you tell your foreigners, oh, let's go to Taal. You can take the boat across the lake, be carried by a horse, and travel all the way up to the crater. But this is not the crater. You understand that? I learned that just recently. Okay? The bigger crater is right smack in the middle. And I only discovered just now, reading through all the materials, that it was quite popular because aside from being one of the more active and the smallest volcanoes in the world, it's a volcano within a lake within a volcano. Wow. So really interesting. And for many, it would be one place you'd like to visit. And then it erupted. Let's talk about the first one. Next slide, please. The world is volatile. When you say volatile, it can change very rapidly with the drop of a hat. Before, nobody cared about face masks. Okay? So you just find people who are probably sick with a cough, or they don't want to inhale the beautiful air along EDSA. They would put on the mask. Now, there is a global shortage of face masks. The impact, medical practitioners who need it are not getting it. That's how volatile. Imagine this. If we continue to suffer from the shortage of the face mask and the doctors are not able to wear the equipment, the gadget, would they continue to perform life-saving medical procedures? So it's a volatile environment. Next slide, please. It's also very uncertain. We cannot predict it. Okay? This is not EDSA. This is one of the streets in Wuhan where the outbreak was ground zero. And usually it's a very busy street. Now, okay, you can dance in the middle and have no issue. It's uncertain. From level 2, volcanic alert level, the same day it shot up to level 3, and then before the night fell, it was level 4. And for 2 weeks, we were anticipating, oh, it might become level 5. That's why Vice Mayor was really scared. And no judgment here. He had reason to be scared because also of the humanitarian realities in the camp. But still, there were a lot of uncertainties. Even FIBOCs weren't 100% sure if we're going to go to alert level 5. Next slide, please. And then it's complex. It's surprising that when they started to shut down Wuhan, and when the entire business environment of China started to slow down, Apple, Samsung, and a lot of other businesses started to take a pinch. Why? Because a lot of the manufacturing businesses in China that supplies bits and pieces of your cell phones or your clothes or your shoes or your medicines are manufactured in China. Imagine if this particular problem continues. So the interconnectedness of everything that we do, especially for you guys in the tourism sector, this is particularly more resonant, I would say, because you're dependent on the interconnectivity of the entire world, which makes it more complicated. Next, please. And then this. And Ma'am Alma alluded to this earlier. Aside from our climate crisis, aside from the potential health crisis created by COVID-19, we are now also facing credibility crisis. When you check your phone and look at your news feeds and updates on Facebook or Instagram, do you automatically believe what you see and read is true? No, but that wasn't the case before. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of people, the first thing that they read when they check Facebook, oh, totoo yan. And they stop investigating and trying to understand if there is some semblance of truth in what they're saying. If you're following political news in the US, fake news, alternative facts, has been weaponized to the point that, well, public confusion is creating opportunities for bad players. Okay, next please. So, that's the VUCA world. And we go back to the Philippines. Aren't you proud we made it to top 10? Actually, we went down. 2018, we were top 3 in the World Risk Index, the World Risk Report. It's a global compilation by the United Nations, and they focus on identifying where countries stand in terms of exposure, vulnerability, susceptibility, lack of coping capabilities, and lack of adaptive capacities. So it's a big improvement. From number 3, we're down to number 9. But we're still number 10 within the top 10. Are we going to go down? Probably. But it's nothing to do with our constant exposure. Executive Director Nestor mentioned earlier, we are in the Pacific Ring of Fire, which makes for our beautiful volcanoes, our wonderful beaches. But it comes with the hazards of volcanic volcanoes, tsunamis, typhoons, storm surges. So, are we just going to sit back and just wait for the tides to come at us? No, because the measure of the World Risk Index also look at socioeconomic factors. Are the Filipino people capable of withstanding the onslaught of typhoons, recovering from volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and so on and so forth? Next slide, please. So, this is the natural hazard profile of the Philippines by the UN OCHA, Organization for Collaboration for Humanitarian Action. And the red, practically that you see there, basically where earthquakes have their impact. Okay, you can check it out on your own. But just to put it in context, 20, remember that, 20 plus. 20 plus typhoons a year, 20 plus earthquakes daily. Most of them we don't feel. And then 22 active volcanoes. And yet you're promoting tourism, right? Why not? The Philippines, don't get me wrong, I love the other countries, but the Philippines has really some really nice place to be proud of. And we need to be able to work with this. That's why my next slide, please, is this. Mayon Volcano. Have you been to Mayon Volcano? The crater? Okay, good. Because it's not nice looking inside the crater. The first time I went to see Mayon, they brought us to the Mayon Hotel, View Hotel. It's closer to the crater. And when you're there, it's weird because it's not as beautiful when you're from afar. And that is the reason why I put up this photo. We live in a constant threat of natural hazards and disasters. But when you take the bigger picture, it's awe-inspiring. It's beautiful. And you would like other people to see it. Some people even invite other people to see it while it's erupting because it's fancy and cute. But that is the Philippine reality for you. We are blessed with so much natural wonders and beauties, but that also carries the curse. And it's up to us to figure out how to navigate through them. Next slide, please. So, this is a prescription about how to navigate the VUCA world. So, for a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, there are some things that we can do. And the sources are at the bottom of the slide. So the organizers, if you get the slide, the sources for the things that I'm sharing are all indicated there. First, see the bigger picture. We cannot just look at it from, okay, disasters or crisis, government nang bahala dyan. I will continue to do my business. I will not get involved. Okay? Or, hindi ako sasali sa mga programa ng DTI kasi doesn't affect me. Ang problema naman ng Taal, hindi kami apektado sa Bohol or sa Davao. It's too far. I don't care. Bahala mo sila malunod ng ashfall. But the bigger picture is, because of the Taal, a lot of people, a lot of travels were also canceled. Going to the Philippines. The bigger picture, Taal is not next to the airport, but the asphalt canceled so many flights. So in one way or the other, sakit ng kalingkingan, dama ng buong katawan. We are an archipelago spread out across seas and waters. There are no limited bridges. We are not connected in the real sense of the word. But any news and development related to crisis, disasters, pandemics, what have you, that impact the Philippines, affects the travel industry, affects the tourism industry. So, sorry, nag-feedback, masakit sa tenga, baka magalit yung mga nakikinig. Feedback ko na lang na mas malakas. Okay, is it better? There, okay, good. So, we need to see the bigger picture. And if you would like your smarts to be challenged, I recommend you consider going to IAM for the systems thinking. If this is the first time you're hearing about it, it's a way of looking at a particular trend by understanding also the underlying mental models that explains what it is. It's mostly for wicked problems. Wicked problems are problems that are far too complicated for any one solution. Case in point, the traffic along EDSA. It's a wicked problem because it's not just a matter of reducing the number of cars on the road. It's not as simple as creating more roads or expanding EDSA. It's a wicked problem because there are so many interconnected parts that one solution might not be the solution. So systems thinking is an approach that you can go into So when you go back to your respective offices, consider that. Next, build trust. I don't know if some people grow up in the business sector thinking that they can go at it, become a businessman, an entrepreneur, and not build relationships. That's crazy stupid. Because at the end of the day, what keeps you sustainable and profitable is trust. It's the relationship that you are able to build even when you are starting, all the way until you are the global leader. The relationships you build across from your suppliers to your employees to your stockholders to the general public is what will carry you across in and out of disasters, pandemics, and crisis. Next, learn quickly, prototype. Having worked for the corporate world for 17 years and being part of the team that works on communications and branding and marketing, before they can come up with a copy for a, let's say, a full-page ad in a newspaper, it will take at least a month. So they come up with a pitch, they give it to the agency goes back with some concepts, okay, some proofs, then you make a choice, and then you change and go back and forth. Before you know it, okay, it has been a month before you launch it. But nowadays, because of the VUCA world, when you'd find out that spending all that time trying to perfect what you want to say, the need for it has passed. And it's great for those of you who are in the MSMEs because you have the agility and the flexibility that big companies don't. So you can make the decisions fairly quickly and adapt quite quickly to the situation. Okay, but doing that, you have to sorry, next slide. The slide before. Slide before. Back. The fourth bucket. You learn quickly, but you ask questions. Don't base your decision on what? Whim or the dream or the nightmare you had the night before. Base it on actual data. And the good thing about the world that we live in today, there's so much data. So it would be virtually irresponsible of you guys as decision makers in the industry that I love, the tourism industry, if you do not base your decision on actual data because it's out there. And then lastly, embrace change. It's something that we have to come to terms with. We are within the Pacific Ring of Fire. There are volcanoes everywhere. There are storms everywhere. And we find ourselves constantly faced with that challenge. But this is one quick question I've been thinking to myself. What programs do beach resorts, particularly those in the areas that are prone to the wet season, do outside the summer season? It doesn't happen last year. It happened from the beginning of time. But have you started to think, okay, so what do we do when the sun is out and the rains are in and nobody wants to go to the beach? I haven't seen a concrete program for that, but in many occasions, okay, they lower the rates. It's called the lean season. So we're just banking on hulog ng langit. May isang turista na nagmamagaling na magpunta ng beach kahit umuulan. Right? So in that sense, you are hiding from the reality that your business is actually built on a place that's only marketable pagka-summer, or is it? Is there a way to look at your resort business that makes it an enticing place to go to even if it's raining? Okay, next slide, please. And then this one is what I would recommend for Filipino SMEs and for you guys in the tourism industry. set up contingency plans, and then contribute to community resilience. I'll explain the first one. If you are preparing a contingency plan now for COVID-19, chances are it's too late, right? Because your contingency plan is supposed to be prepared years ago. And when you're preparing them now, you run the risk of having to do it quite hurriedly. You might invest more money doing it, and baka it might be less effective. The best contingency plans have been developed a long time before a crisis. Sabi nga nila also in the disaster space, the moment when you need to rescue and do emergency response is too late. Kasi the idea behind resilience or disaster risk reduction and preparedness, pag dumating yung tsunami, nanonood na lang kayo lahat from afar, watching the waves and the destruction, but everything is cool, everybody's cool and calm because everybody's protected. Right? So if you have to work on a contingency plan now, medyo, okay, we need to really step it up a little. So learning from this, when you go back, start thinking about the rest of the problems you might face in the future. And then the last one that I would recommend for you guys in the as Filipino SMSE and the tourism sector, we need to be resilient as a country because we cannot be resilient alone. I guess some of you are thinking, kung lahat ng mga competition ko mawala, I'll be so happy. Okay, maybe. If you are into the monopoly type, they're great. But then again, you have to consider the impact that what would have in the bigger socio-political dynamics of it all. At the end of the day, every one of us needs to work together to build a resilient country. That includes sectors like you guys. Okay? Next, please. So, let's see. Can we flash the Slido results of the poll? What is most important? Profitability, business continuity, sustainability, or resilience? We have 30 scores. And so far, ang overwhelming sustainability. Growing up in the corporate world, talagang the byword. Sustainability. Okay? Question. Can you be sustainable without being resilient? Okay. Sino nagsasabi na I can be sustainable without being resilient? Okay, wala. Who says na you have to be resilient bago ka maging sustainable? Huwag na kayong mag-away-away. Okay? I will give you the answer. Can we flash the next slide, please? The answer is I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what is more important to you guys. Profitability, sustainability, business continuity, or resilience. You know why? At the end of the day, it's you guys who would set this direction for yourself. But know that without a business continuity, you cannot be profitable for a long time. If your profitability runs for a limited period of time, you are not sustainable. And trust that if you are not resilient, however sustainable you think your business is, when blank hits the fan, chances are your business will collapse. So this is an attempt to scare you guys into action in the hope that you protect this industry that I love. I love it because there's still so many places I want to visit in the Philippines na baka hindi ko na mapuntahan kasi nga tuloy-tuloy yung mga disasters natin. So one question is, we hide from the reality that disasters exist? Or, next slide please, we face it. Pun. Okay, if you know that. We face that reality. We live in a place that is constantly under threat of natural and man-made hazards and risks. Right? We have talked about pandemics, volcanic eruptions, typhoons. We haven't talked about what happened at the Resorts World, Manila, Resorts World. One guy, 20 plus casualties. We did not talk about yet what happened with the pavilion, the fire, right? These are man-made threats and hazards that will also continue to impact us. What about the controversial Tokhang drug campaign? Whether or not, wherever side of the political spectrum you sit in, it's creating some issues and problems. Might not see it right now, but in the bigger sense of the word, this will come back to bite us in the ass. So all of these things is either we hide from it, we pretend they don't exist, or we face it and start preparing now. Okay, next slide, please. And so this is closer to the end. You know what this is, of course? Anybody who's familiar with this photo? It's post-Pinatubo eruption. Kanina we saw Taal, and then Mayon, and Pinatubo. We don't know what will happen with Mount Pinatubo, pero wow! Look at what happened a couple of years later. Another tourist attraction. And they charge 1,000 pesos per person to go up and look at it. And then you cannot swim in it. Unless you want to swim in a sulfur-rich lake. Okay? But again, it brings back to that space. The world, the universe, has a way of destroying and rebuilding. Volcanic eruptions tend to destroy, but they also rebuild. Which I guess is also a model for all of us to take in. As businesses, as people, we need to look at it from that perspective. We go up, we go down, we go up again. So next slide, please. Which brings us to this, the opportunities we find in a disaster situation. One, kanina sabi nila saka ni, ni Yusek, it's all about altruism. That they want you guys to do this for the love of country. I tend to say, do it for the love of yourself. Make sure that what you're doing benefits your organization and yourself, because that is what is going to keep you moving forward. And feeling ko, by doing so, you become altruistic just the same. If you are able to capitalize on effective contingency planning, risk assessment, you will be able to stand out from competition. Imagine if you are a travel agency, which all of the protocols in place for, let's say, anti-COVID-19 transmission, compared to a travel agency that's clueless about it. So a disaster can give you that edge if you just take preparations. You can address a market need, right? I'm not quite particularly sure how it's going to play out in the tourism sector, but think about it. In every disaster that we encounter in the Philippines, brought about by typhoons and recently Taal, there are constantly thousands of people in need of evacuation. But nobody is providing evacuation tents for rent. Okay, is it a bad idea? Maybe, maybe not. Because it's a need and nobody has been servicing that area? Could be. In the tourism sector, there are also opportunity for addressing market needs. You can also help the community. And sometimes, some people help because they do want to feel good about themselves. Some people help the community because they want to benefit from positive PR. I don't care why you do it, but help. Because at the end of the day, each one of us playing a role contributes to addressing the problem. Your selfish agendas, you can keep to yourselves. But at the end of the day, if it helps the community, fine. Next, test your system. The good thing about a really robust business continuity plan / risk assessment, slash crisis management, you constantly drill and test it. It's not like you hire a crisis person that set out the plan for you guys and then pay him off and then that's it. The crisis plan, the contingency plan, everything that you put together to address a crisis is only as effective as the last time you used it. So the thing is, you have a plan, practice, practice, practice until it becomes synonymous to your system. And then lastly, build your brand. In this global world where everybody is competing for that space on your phone or your tablet and your laptops, it pays to stand out from the rest. And you stand out by being the brand that is resilient, the brand that makes a difference being resilient. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is from Tito Nelson. And he said, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Sabi kanina din ni executive director, I didn't catch it. I was running around. Is it business as usual? For you guys, is it business as usual today? No, it's not. And a lot of you are thinking, maybe I should go into a different industry. Maybe I should go into piggery. Ay, wag. Kasi may swine flu. Wait, maybe I should go into whatever. So for example, transport sector. Ay, hindi kasi ang daming bawal sa regulations. There are so many industries out there and you can spend the entire day thinking about where to go next because you're afraid that the tourism sector is flailing. Chances are, okay, you might have a more difficult time finding an industry that is immune to the realities of disasters and crisis. So face the fear and prepare for it. Next, please. And it starts with understanding crisis and disasters. My last advice to you guys who came here to understand COVID-19 and its impact, check out the credible sources. It's either the WHO or the DOH. If it came from your friend or your sister or your cousins, nephews, classmates, dog's trainer, don't trust it. Get it straight from the source. And it's not that difficult. So either the WHO or the DOH can lead you to the information that you need. Next, please. So, going back, a disaster is an event where the need is so great that the resources of an institution or organization is no longer sufficient to provide for the people. Of course, we use the word loosely, di ba? Disaster. Okay lang yon. Basta when we talk about the technical aspect of it, disaster happens when the resources are insufficient. Next, please. And then this one, whenever you talk about disasters or crisis, you inevitably have to talk about risk. In the other forums I've attended, it's oftentimes a discussion on enterprise risk. But those are oftentimes financially motivated or financially driven risk. They don't talk about much disasters and crisis in this space. But risk is where you begin. Understanding the risk can help you prepare your business. And the challenge for all of us here in the forum, when you go back to your respective offices, what are the risks I'm facing? And then seriously plot out how to manage those risks. Next, please. So this is the entire blueprint of how it goes on in the crisis and the disaster risks sectors. But we'll not go into a deep dive into that. Next slide, please. And this is my sales pitch. After all that time talking about the dangers of pandemics, the problems with crisis and disasters, I would like for you guys to think about this. If I feel I need to know more about disasters, if you feel that you would like to venture into uncharted territory, we need more people to join the Executive Master in Disaster Risk and Crisis Management at the AIM. Mura lang yung tuition. Hindi totoo yun. Miss Erlene can attest to that. But kung may will, may way. Okay? So the Executive Master in Disaster Risk and Crisis Management is one of two programs being offered by the Stephen Swillig School of Development Management. Kung kanina yung mga hindi nagtaas ng kamay at mayaman na, either you go back to school and use up the money, or you fund the people who would like to go to school and support the program. Okay? Otherwise, kumbaga, spend time to think about it, and if you get to know somebody who might be interested to know more about crisis and disasters and what we're doing about it, spread the word. Tell them that there's this program in AIM, and then there's this fat VIP guy who stood there for an hour or so sermoning us about the dangers of disaster. Okay? Thank you very much and good morning.
Thank, thank you, Mr. Walter Panganiban. Now, to discuss a few points as part of the forum process, let us all welcome back on the stage Ms. Judith Ilagan.
First point would be, because we want to provide time for the meat of the forum, we will dispense with lengthy introductions. Many of our subject experts are known personalities without need for long introduction anyway. It is also possible that we will have to go for working breaks, so be prepared to have them here or be quick to make sure we do not cut short the program and speakers. This will also be a green forum, meaning we will limit the use of papers. Instead, you will see the program flashed on the screen, and the presentations, with the permission of the presenters, will be uploaded after the forum. Those who attended today will be given passwords for downloading. We gave time for the speakers to present. However, if we think that the discussion is something useful and relevant, we can allow overtime. That means that some open forum may have to be shortened. That does not mean you cannot ask questions. Please do. You can either email or text your questions and to whom you are directing it, and we will hand this to the speakers so they can answer via the same medium. Actually, we will be having Slido, so we will be presenting later the password and the username for you to send in your questions to your chosen speakers or panelists. We sent invitations to all concerned agencies for them to participate in the forum. While many graciously accepted and sent their representatives, we do not have control over the others' decision not to. Finally, we will give certificate of participation to all attending at least 75% of the forum. In any case, we advise you to finish this because the session 4 in the forum will synthesize all the matters taken up from sessions 1 to 3. Provide a business take on this and propose possible interim and long-term solutions that can be executed by the enterprises to minimize business losses and plan forward. So that's about it for the forum matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Judith Ilagan. Now, for our second presenter, let us all welcome from the National Economic Development Authority, Ms. Remedios Endersha, Director for Regional Development Staff.
Morning, everyone. I'm from government, so following Mr. Pang, wait, I forgot my paper. Yeah, following Mr. Panganiban's presentation is quite different, no, from a private sector perspective, and me coming from the bureaucracy. So I don't know where you got the picture at. Okay, so my topic my topic is well assigned to me by the organizers on the economic impact of disasters in the Philippines. So ito talagang government na government. So let's go to the first slide. Ah, okay. Na-discuss na rin to eh. Mr. Panganiban discussed this, the World Risk Index in 2019. So it shows that the Philippines is ranked number 9. But the good news is the Philippines has been improving in terms of its coping mechanisms and adaptive capacity. So that means that we have learned from previous disasters. So even if we have been staying within the top 10, we're improving in terms of the most important aspects, which is yung tawag natin dito, vulnerabilities. Okay. Ayaw yata. Okay, next slide na lang. Sige. Here, it's not just the Philippines, di ba? Worldwide, we have disasters. In 2011, Thailand had a massive flooding. And it led to, there was a widespread flooding in central Thailand, including Bangkok, where car factories and businesses are intensively located. It reduced the world's industrial production by 2.5%, and then GDP growth rate declined from an expected 4.1% to 2.9%. So okay, I'll discuss this later. But it's very interesting because the flooding in Bangkok affected global economy. Well, later na lang. Okay. Another one. Next slide. Next slide, please. Here. This is a volcanic eruption in Iceland. Okay, it says that our staff said that the pronunciation of the volcano is Eyavaria, Eyafiyakla, Yeyakitul. Okay. Oo, naka-syllable by syllable yung yung script. It canceled over 95,000 flights and caused millions of passengers to be stranded not only in Europe but across the world. And then the total loss for the airline industry was estimated at around $1.7 billion. So over 95,000 flights were canceled across Europe during the 6-day travel ban, with later flights figures suggesting 107,000 flights canceled during an 8-day period, accounting for 48% of total air traffic and roughly 10 million passengers globally. So, in the Philippines, as I will discuss later, hindi pa tayo umaabot sa ganyang level. We have not reached that level of losses. Our losses have been generally confined to the domestic economy. So, next slide. Okay, this is the disaster profile of the Philippines, and our source is it's called an International Disaster Database of the Center for Research on Epidemiology of Disasters, and it was cited in a report. And then it says that from 1905 to 2017, our natural disasters have mostly been in terms of earthquakes, typhoons, volcanic eruptions, and tsunami. And the frequency of occurrence is about 837 from that period. The total deaths was estimated at 81,000 people and affected 204 million individuals from that period. And the total estimated damages is about 26 billion pesos. I don't know how they computed this, but this was a long period, so, well. Aside from the natural hazard events, we also have human-induced disasters. Yung armed conflicts, we had the Marawi siege in 2017. And then we also have droughts. Drought is a manifestation of climate change. Unlike, unlike typhoons and tsunami, droughts are what we call creeping events. Matagal bago mangyari. And during the periods of droughts, we have some time to prepare for it. Unlike typhoons and tsunami, these are sudden onset events. Very little time to prepare for them. Okay. Next slide, please. There are two types of hazard events. One is called hydrometeorological events. Ito yung water-related hazards. Ito yung pag-asa, yung nire-report ng pag-asa. The other one is yung geologic. Ito naman yung FIVOX types of disasters. Ito yung earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. A study of a 2018 study of the Asian Development Bank on natural disasters, public spending, and creative destructions reports that the Philippines is especially prone to hydromet hazards, such as typhoons and floods, which account to over 80% of the natural disasters in the country during the last 50 years. The country's long coastlines with high concentration of people and economic activity and heavy dependence on agriculture and natural resources contribute to this high risk. Typhoons, which usually occur on the average about 20 times per year, are the most common natural hazards that Filipinos face, which result in production losses and disruptions economic activities. Between 2011 and 2015, 94 typhoons visited the country. This is 9.3% more than the number of typhoons during the 2006 to 2010 period. Moreover, the cumulative cost of damages from typhoons has almost tripled to reach 242.9 billion in 2011 to 2015. Next slide. These are the major impacts of disaster in the Philippine economy. These are just samples of them. First, on Ondoy and Pepeng. The total number of affected people was about 4.9 million, with 464 deaths, and estimated damages and losses was 206 billion. Malaki yung Ondoy had a big impact to the economy of about 2.7% of GDP, and that's because it occurred in the NCR in Metro Manila, which accounts about 3/4 of our GDP. Now we have Super Typhoon Yolanda. The effect was lower, even if the coverage was larger, because the regions affected by Typhoon Yolanda are those in Eastern Visayas, which have a much lower gross domestic product. Now the other one, the closure of Boracay. This is probably of interest to you. The impact was about 17.4 billion pesos. Typhoon Nina, the impact was about 28.41 billion. Zamboanga Siege, 6.14 billion. And Marawi Siege, 18 billion. The Marawi siege was the hardest to measure in terms of impact. Why? Because it was concentrated in a city, and within the city it was called the most affected area. This was the central business district. And when we were doing the assessment, we found out that buildings inside the city center were several stories high, and then beneath the building is where they kept their wealth. And it's very hard to account for the wealth. So I think our estimation is a little low. Now, how do we estimate it? Parang baka sabihin niyo, how come immediately may estimates ang NEDA? We use models. Meron kaming models. We don't go to each and every establishment and ask them how much did you lose. We have input-output model. It's called it's an economic table. It's a matrix that determines the interrelationships among sectors. And then we also have another kind of model. It's called Toddler. It's like an Excel-based table it has values, and then it accounts for all the damages and losses, and it automatically computes the impact to GDP. So this is not an actual survey of establishments. These are estimates based on models. Okay, next slide. Okay, the specific impacts of typhoons Ondoy and Pepeng, of course you know. For Ondoy, the impact was 2.7% of GDP, very small compared to what we saw in Thailand and Iceland. The most affected sectors were industry and trade. It led to damages or losses in inventories and raw materials, interruptions in business due to power and water shortages, damaged machinery, inaccessibility of factories, and employee absences. Most flooded factories were small and medium enterprises, except the ones in Pasig, yung malalaking factories doon. For Pepeng, this occurred in central northern Luzon. The impact, the effect was mostly in the agricultural areas. And this is mostly because, well, nandun kasi yung ating mga, the biggest plantations, and it bore the brunt of the typhoon. Next slide, please. For Yolanda, the biggest damage and losses from Typhoon Yolanda was actually in the housing sector. It's not in industry, trade, or infrastructure. It was in the housing sector. In terms of losses, when we say damages, these are actual cost of damages, yung physical damages. But losses are measured in terms of disruptions to the economy, loss of livelihoods, loss of income. So that's the difference between damage and loss. And we add all these things and we determine the impact to the economy. So next slide, please. For Marawi Siege, again, the biggest damage was in the housing sector. And the estimate is about 6.15 billion. And the highest losses were in industry, trade, and services. Why? Because the Maranaos are basically traders. And the losses to the establishments were accounted for under this sector. Next slide, please. For Boracay, you know this. Tourism is the highest, most affected. The 6-month closure affected hotel operations, tourist arrivals, small and medium enterprises, and tourism development livelihoods. There are about 3,211 establishments which incurred losses. About 40,000 workers directly or indirectly employed in Boracay. Indirectly meaning those who supply, for example, vegetables to the hotels. They're not in Boracay. They get it from other provinces, but they're also indirectly affected. And the impact, of course, was borne largely by the private sector. Unlike the other disasters, the impacts are, well, private sector, but government generally puts in more resources in the other disasters. Next slide, please. Okay. It's not in my slide, but just to demonstrate further the impact of these disasters, we have a budget item in the national budget called the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Fund. And this is where we get money for rehabilitation and recovery efforts. Now, in 2018, the amount allocated for rehabilitation recovery was 25.5 billion. Diyan kumukuha yung government agencies ng budgets for the rehabilitation recovery. This is in addition to the regular budgets of government agencies. In 2019, the amount was 20 billion. And in 2020, it was reduced to 16 billion. Okay. Bumaba kasi some of the well, in the last year, we didn't have that much major disasters. So, well, they had to reallocate the disaster funds for other purposes. Now, how do you put disaster risk reduction in the national planning and policy? You've heard of the Philippine Development Plan? Okay. Under the Philippine Development Plan, we have a bedrock strategy. This is one of the foundation strategies for us to achieve our goal of inclusive growth. And what does it say? It says that vulnerability reduction should be an integral part of development. It recognizes disasters and climate change risks as factors that erode development gains and hamper development potential. So very macro. It aims to reduce the risks to communities exposed to the threats of climate change and climate change impacts and disasters. Now, this one actually highlights vulnerable sectors, particularly the poor. And so, the objective here is to empower the poor so that when there are disasters, they are able to cope better. It also highlights incorporation of disaster risk reduction strategies in sectoral plans and programs to ensure safety of people and communities and their resiliency in times of hazardous events. So, like this forum, we need business continuity plans. Aside from that, for infrastructure sector, of course, we also want higher standards for building resilient infrastructure. So that's a strategy, a major strategy under the Philippine Development Plan. Next slide, please. Okay, what happens during a disaster? Immediately, during the first few days of a disaster, we have what we call the response actions. This involves rescue, relief, emergency assistance, immediate recovery, particularly ensuring access, securing immediate repair of lifelines. Lifelines meaning our roads, our hospitals, power. These are the things that are given attention, given focus during the recovery phase. And then after the recovery phase, we have the rehabilitation and recovery phase, which is the more medium term, siguro more, 6 months, a few years. And it emphasizes the principle of building back better. Disasters cause damages, losses, but it also provides an opportunity for us to do things better. It revitalizes the economy. About 1 or 2 years after a disaster, the local gross regional domestic product increases because there's a lot of economic activity during the rehabilitation process. For example, yung mga bahay na sira, there was a lot of construction activities going on in Tacloban to the extent that GI sheets we were running, the contractors were running out of GI sheets and construction materials. And then again, immediately after, hotel accommodations, restaurants were booming because there were many construction going on. Even international relief agencies were there, and they were revitalizing the economy. It also is an opportunity to restore livelihoods or introduce new forms of livelihoods. And then, well, as I said, rehabilitation and reconstruction of damaged infrastructure is done at higher standards. We want the buildings, new roads, new bridges, to be able to withstand future hazard events. So tumataas yung infrastructure standards natin. And then upgrading of social services. During Typhoon Yolanda, there was a lot of assistance in rebuilding the schools. And when they rebuilt the schools, you saw school buildings which are now more modern, had better equipment, more resilient, and were better than what they were before the disaster. So it's an opportunity also. Disasters bring opportunities for building back better and for growth. Next slide, please. Okay. I'm quoting a phrase from the Global Assessment Report of 2019. This is a report produced by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and it says, there's a need to transition from one paradigm to another, from managing disasters to managing risks. Because we're so used to managing disasters, we should do things differently. Let's look at our risk, our vulnerabilities. It's it's doing things before a disaster happens. So it's more of mitigation, preparedness, rather than post-disaster relief and rehabilitation, which are more costly. Yung rehabilitation in terms of the whole disaster management phase, rehabilitation takes the longest and has the biggest cost to the economy. Okay, next slide. And next slide, please. And given this, what is government doing? What are our policies to increase our resiliency? One, we invest in science-based DRR and CCA programs and projects for resilience building. Diba, in the last years, we've seen more science-based maps. Narinig nyo na yung ano, diba? Yung, gosh. Well, when Pag-asa makes its forecasts now, they're more science-based. Well, they're science-based, but they have already upgraded their technology. And the maps are already available to be in their websites and can be made accessible to the others. It also allowed communities to be more prepared. Meron tayong early warning systems now at the community level. So even in small islands, they're able to, to inform the residents about impending typhoons. There's a best practice in Camotes Island. During Typhoon Yolanda, they were able to evacuate all residents because of an information that was immediately relayed to the community, and it resulted to zero casualty in the island. Okay, and then updated land use plans. Importante ito sa mga local government units because it is supposed to guide future development of a city or municipality. You want land use plans to make use of new technologies, new information, updated data. Okay? And government has invested billions in science-based information. And then we have an annual allocation for a disaster contingent fund for government's efforts on emergency response and recovery. This is a standby loan facility from the World Bank, and we're also developing one for the Asian Development Bank. And the reason for this is that when there's a disaster, we have an easy access to funding at low interest. So it's called the contingent fund. The other one is adoption of disaster risk financing and insurance for managing the financial effects of natural disasters. This has not yet gained widespread acceptability, but risk financing, we think, is already an important resiliency measure. Insurance, we have health insurance, we have all types of insurance, but we don't have risk insurance for disasters. It's not yet common among local governments, among individuals, but in certain countries, this is already mandated. And then we have the fourth is comprehensive and inclusive social protection and livelihood assistance to communities and sectors vulnerable to disasters. These are government programs for vulnerable communities, those living along the coastal areas. You want them to be more safe by putting them in safe zones. Okay, that's one. And then the other one is to strengthen local capacities on disaster risk reduction. We believe that local action is key to resilience because it is there at the local level where immediate planning, immediate response must be done to lessen the impacts of disasters. And governments also investing so much on capacity building for communities. So next slide. Okay, this is my second to the last slide. Earlier I mentioned about the Bangkok slide. The Bangkok flood, and I saw a paragraph in the global assessment report. And since this is on business continuity planning, let me read it. Making a case for business continuity planning. Okay, that's my statement. But in the report, it says that flooding in around Bangkok, this was 2011, triggered a cascading regional impact because so many components essential to manufacturing in countries such as Japan were made there. So yung mga Honda, Toyota, what do you call this? The value chain was disrupted because of the flooding in Bangkok. Okay. The disruption of Bangkok manufacturing blocked the supply chain. Most of the disrupted suppliers in Thailand were SMEs that lacked resilience to flood hazards. Few SMEs had contingency plans or alternative premises to relocate their stock or plant. Some had sensitive equipment and supplies at ground level, and a few had relevant insurance cover. So that was the problem. That's the reason why the impact of the economy was so large. It also led to global impacts to the economy because the value chain was so huge. Many did not have access to capital or recovery loans. So the most important is that these flood impacts were the realization of a series of risks that, like many systemic risks, seemed obvious in hindsight, but were not perceived fully until the impact occurred. So nasa huli yung realization pag nandyan na yung impacts. Okay. And so just my input for your business continuity planning. Next slide, please. My last. Disasters happen, but we can reduce the risks. We can increase our resiliency, prepare for them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Remedios Sendersha. Our next presenter is from Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Cities. The Executive Director, Mr. Renato Redentor Red Constantino.
Good morning, everyone. Maraming salamat kay Ma'am Ama and a lot of the other officials who extended the invitation. If you can just go to the first slide, please. Thank you. We are from a different kind of institute. We are focused very much on climate policy. And our work encompasses a very broad range of topics. I'd like to introduce a little bit of our organization because it's going to be very important that you also understand where we're coming from. Not everything that we say or I say will be comforting to a lot of you. I'm not here to give you a good time. I'm actually here to make you think beyond what I think many are assuming to be a future that is predictable. And it's not. Next slide, po. As the title says, yes, we have to save pessimism for better times, but at the same time, we need to understand what's already here and what's coming our way. Often, the discussion in media, especially among civil society, they talk about climate change as a ticking time bomb. We disagree. That time bomb has long exploded, and we are already in the beginning stages of the impacts. It is not often that we talk to colleagues from the MSME sector, especially those involved in tourism and DTI. So we take this opportunity very seriously because you are all at the front line of what will be a situation that will become worse before it becomes better. The way that you work together and that you re-evaluate your business plans, especially by looking at a far longer horizon, will be the most important thing you will ever do. It is not enough for us to look at electoral cycles, which is what we have been trained to do. especially with our medium-term development plans of 6 years, kulang na kulang po yun. We have to look farther beyond so that we have an ability not only to prepare, that's obvious, but also to pivot early, because those who can pivot early will do things better. We work on fair climate policy and the promotion of low carbon development. And that's not an easy thing. Our organization is non-partisan because we feel that whatever the concerns of Filipinos, that Filipinos have with this administration or with the previous one is not as relevant as what we will have to do together over the next decade or 2 decades or 3. Because climate change does not really respect who is in power and who will be coming in or out, going out. It respects the way we actually understand this issue. Lastly, our organization is an advisor as well to 48 governments across the world, some of whom are the most vulnerable or even more vulnerable than ours. They are acting as well, sometimes far better than we are, maybe because they see a different horizon or use a different lens. So next slide po. As our agenda is international, very much working with many institutions, with the UN and different governments, we also see to it that we are very much rooted in our national domestic challenges. So we work very closely with our colleagues from the Department of Finance, Department of Energy, the Climate Change Commission, NEDA as well, and both houses of Congress. Because the problem we recognize is so huge. The crisis that we're looking at is so important that we cannot leave the solutions to this crisis to government alone. It is unfair, and government cannot handle this on its own as well. They need all sectors to support an agenda that looks far beyond what we're seeing today. So in this slide, for instance, is a photo with DOF officials. We helped craft and pass and are now part of the board of the People's Survival Fund, which is one of our small measures of contributing to advancing options for local governments from provinces up to municipalities. Next slide po. We are also very much rooted in Region 8. When people responded to Yolanda, our response was, we will be there to stay. We are not going to just help in the emergency period, but help in training people, much of whom, some of whom are part of our Solar Scholars program, so that community survivors can actually train others as well and pay things forward. It is not enough because our communities do not like being victims. They do not like being victims. What they want is better development and to manage to help others. So many of our Solar Scholars have been responding to the plight that have beset other communities in north of Luzon, for instance. It is their opportunity to pay back the help that was given to them by training others and developing their own renewable energy systems, which is what we're also trying to do. It's not simply importing technology, but allowing the communities to help others as well, and not only their own. Next slide po. Small things, from the very international sphere, working with the IMF and the World Bank and the UN institutions, up to barangay level, where here we're trying to provide solar refrigeration for a barangay in Giwan. Its name is Suluan. When people say that Yolanda first made landfall in Giwan, that's not enough. Yung barangay na Suluan kung saan siya unang tumama. Here's the thing. In Suluan, which is the first place where Yolanda made landfall in the country, normally, people think that this place should be all about disaster resilience only or adaptation. They've chosen what many are choosing as well, because communities and MSMEs really do not need to respond to the climate crisis with a climate response. What you need and what our people deserve is better development. It's neither adaptation or mitigation. The metric that we need is development, because by developing themselves in ways that make them more sustainable, healthy, happy, we are contributing to the global good as well. So in Suluan, what they asked for is a transition that they can make as early as they can towards clean energy systems, alongside adaptation programs as well. Next slide po. The way you think about the climate crisis, obviously, you can just go through the 5 points to make things very simple. And these are very easily explained. It's warming. There is no doubt. There is no doubt that it's also about us. The anthropogenic influence of humans, agreed upon by over 98% of the scientific community globally. The 2% are 2%. You listen to scientists, and that is also what our development practitioners in government are doing as well. It's us, we're sure it's bad, and it will become worse before it becomes better. We can fix it. Qualified. We can fix some, not all. There are impacts that are already taking place that are irreversible. It is best that you know, so that you don't head straight into something that is not going to change in the near future. We can fix it? Maybe. Not all. Next slide po. How do we do this? This slide shows you a lot of the options, the things that we're working on with the different governments around the world. Colleagues, last year marked the 10th anniversary of Ondoy, and the 6th of Yolanda. Something to think about. Natural history and national history are two very different things. We live in human history and human time, and sometimes you don't think far bigger, because natural history or geologic time is far longer than human time. In fact, human time is only a blip, maliit na tuldok sa entirety of geologic time. And what is history for us is oftentimes just current affairs for nature. So I mentioned Ondoy and Yolanda. Here's something to think about, to give you pause, so that you look farther ahead. Yolanda and Ondoy and all the other extreme weather events are the results of emissions that we failed to prevent 2 to 3 decades ago. So they are merely current affairs for nature, and we think of that as history already. Again, the extreme weather events, and we name them, we can remember them because there's Sendong, there's Pepeng, Ondoy, Ursula, and so on, are the result of emissions that we failed to prevent 20 or 30 years ago. It means that everything we do now will matter in 20 or 30 years. So if you have kids, as I do, their immediate future is baked in. And that's not good necessarily. But it's also good if you recognize this, because everything we do now will give their children, the kids of your children, a fighting chance to win all the other issues that are as important as the climate crisis, like poverty, fighting against misogyny, fighting against the epidemic of rape across the country, fighting for jobs, human settlements, better health, and happiness. If we lose the climate crisis fight, those other objectives are further out of reach. But also, my colleagues, we are long past the time when people considered climate as an environmental issue. But I want to challenge this body as well and all the other speakers before me. Because I think while many accept that the climate crisis is no longer just an environmental issue, we tend to equate the climate crisis with disasters. And this is wrong. Disasters are important. Don't get me wrong, okay? They're very important. People die if we are not prepared or if we don't know how to deal with disasters. But the climate crisis is not only about disasters. In fact, it might be the second most important part of the climate crisis. And there's even more important parts of it. The challenge today is to move past the fixation of climate change as an issue of disasters, because it's not only about episodic extreme weather events, it is also about slow onset events such as rising temperatures, rising sea levels, and changes in hydrology. None of the slow onset events take place without the drama of calamity, which is why we have neglected slow onset events for so long, because there's no body count. And rising sea levels millimeters per year are not very exciting. When disaster happens, the government throws money, including the world if it's of such a magnitude that it requires immediate contributions. But what is threatening low-income communities, what is threatening MSMEs, which form a huge part of our employment and businesses, are slow onset events that are taking place under the radar of government. And this needs to change. The crisis we're facing is so great that we need more than just a crisis response, but better development. As we often say in our organization, in the face of the climate crisis, it is not enough to just survive. We need to thrive as well, and we need our economy to flourish in the face of increasingly more serious challenges confronting us. The crisis is bigger than everything, as I said, but it is also not necessarily the most important compared to other equally pressing issues such as poverty alleviation, health, education, jobs, and livelihoods. We must realize that any failure to act with commensurate speed and scale in response to this crisis can place these very development goals further out of reach. Next slide, po. The crisis, of course, is threatening, but I also want to say that it presents to us an immense opportunity to transform the economy by baking in not just mainstreaming, but baking into economy-wide systems the high sense of efficiency, synergy, and strategy that the private sector brings to the table. Next slide, po. So as I said earlier, in order to face the crisis, we need to upgrade everything. Supply chains, food supply, urban services, logistics, the energy sector, infrastructure. If we will upgrade everything so that everything becomes more resilient, then it means we will produce more jobs because we will end up having to pump prime the economy. And we need to do that not just because of build, 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 which is an important initiative. Build, build, build has to be in line with making things more resilient by upgrading everything. Why? Because opportunities abound, but also threats exist that are pretty daunting. This slide shows you a number of things. This is a study among many that have been provided by Pag-asa. It is not true that we don't know enough. Our government is working, except that sometimes they don't talk to one another as well as they should. But Pag-asa, for instance, has shown in a microcosm, because I won't go through a lot, that in their latest study, certain parts, big parts of Luzon and Visayas, are projected over the next 2 decades to experience changes in climate that will reach the extremes of historically observed climatic variations. Ibig sabihin, the extremes of rainfall, whether there's less rainfall or not, hindi po disaster, hindi rapid episodic impacts, but the gradual changes that can kill an agricultural region or economy. Less rainfall here, more rainfall there, not extreme drought, not extreme flooding, but things that go beyond what the systems are capable of responding to over time. That means a huge strain on agriculture, supply chains, and so on. And these are documented in Pag-asa. Are these things that are informing the MSMEs of these regions? I'm not sure. If we're not sure, then we can make sure that is an opportunity for the organizers here to start contributing to. That's not the worst news. Extremes of historically observed variations. In some parts of central Mindanao, the projection is that the climate, the temperature, the changes in hydrology will go far beyond what has been observed as extremes already, which means that in areas in central Mindanao like Sultan Kudarat or Cotabato, if you are planning on expanding agribusiness there, I'm not sure that's a wise idea. Apart from the fact that currently, acute poverty is creating breeding grounds of extremism and violence and conflict. Without the climate crisis factored in, the study of Pag-asa says in the next 2 to 3 decades, it will become far worse. Changes in rainfall will surpass, no? It will go down to the extent that there will be food security issues, hunger, in a place that is already dealing with food security and hunger and conflict issues. How do we deal with that? The other side of our scientific work as well shows that as terrestrial areas warm, to the extent that they are not disasters, but which can bring to the knees the agricultural areas in those economies, in those towns and provinces. Our marine ecosystem becomes a thriving fishery opportunity because it occurs alongside terrestrial warming, a swarming of fisheries as an opportunity as well in the same time frame. Are we looking at that, whether you're in tourism or not? Not sure. I think we should. Next slide. So the last thing that you saw from the previous slide is that sea levels are rising at rates in the country that are double the average. And they are even more if we factor in wrong land use planning, which means the rate of subsidence and excessive groundwater extraction is causing land to sink even as the seas are rising. Marine ecosystems. Globally, the projection is pretty grim. The Paris Agreement states the goal of keeping temperatures average worldwide to 2 degrees, if not 1.5, as the safe threshold. What does that mean? It means that if we reach 1.5, it is still no paradise. If the world's average global temperature reaches 2 degrees and above, the world stands to lose 98% of the world's coral reefs by mid-century, 2050, and up to 99% and above by end of century, which is an extermination rate. Okay? If we reach 1.5, the world loses only 90% by 2050, which means if we keep to the globally prescribed safe threshold, we keep only 10%. We don't lose everything. And by end of century, we keep at least 30% of what we have now. The Philippine case is a little different because our situation is a little better